Hi guys, my name is Phoenix Hayes and I'm here at the Anchored Apologetics Conference in Palm Springs, and I am sitting down with the wonderful Craig Hazen, who is also a speaker at this conference. Craig.
Hazen.
Hazen.
Yeah.
I've heard both versions, Craig, so all right, Hazen. Craig, you just got done speaking on a really interesting topic. What was it? The anatomy of a cult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you choose that topic as an apologist?
Allie made me do it.
Oh, she made you do it.
She made me do it.
Okay.
I begged for something else, and she made me do it. It turned out okay, but it was a lecture I'd given maybe 15 or 20 years ago in Budapest, Hungary.
Wow.
You know, so.
It was good. There was a lot of. I laughed more than I expected.
Oh, good. No, that makes me feel very good.
Especially your comment about just you're a cult, like putting it to a cult. It's just a word that we tend to throw around a little too much these days. And funnily enough, people who are actually in cults don't like it.
See, I mean, I made kind of a deal that we can't really be using the word cult because it kind of sounds like you're stabbing somebody with a stiletto.
Yeah. Right.
You're a member of a cult.
So what was the alternative phrase you said is better?
Well, alternative is great. Alternative religions or new religious movements.
New religious movements.
Yeah. So if you happen to be sitting next to a Mormon at an airport, rather than saying, "Hey, are you a member of a cult?" And that may not go over very well, and that might not stimulate the conversation. But maybe something like, help me understand. Is this a new religious movement?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But of course, they come back. Well, some people would say, "No, it's not that new. It's a couple of hundred years." But so, what would you say to that?
Oh, I'd say, well, there's a lot more that's gone on in church history than you might imagine. So it's still very young.
In the grand scheme of religions, 200 years.
Yeah, Buddhism's been around for 2,500 years.
There we go. Sorry, I'm being distracted by my phone's alarm. So sorry. Okay. Which of the alternative religious movements did you?
Let's say, for the sake of our conversation, you can use the word cult.
Okay, I'm allowed to for this brief exchange.
It's the first word that pops to your mind. It does to mine.
Right. So during the talk, could you share which of the movements did you particularly focus on during this particular lecture?
Yeah, I focused on Mormonism because it's just, my academic work through the years, and the fact that, I grew up in Southern California, which is kind of a Mormon enclave. And in fact, they call it the I-15 corridor.
The I-15 corridor.
There's an interstate highway, I-15, that goes from like San Diego all the way up into Canada.
Okay.
And there are Mormons all the way along. Of course, that runs right through Las Vegas and then Salt Lake, all the cities of Utah, and then up into Idaho, which is a Mormon enclave. So that's, growing up in Southern California, and it just couldn't help it. I always lived next door to some Mormon missionary house or something. So
right, they were always, okay.
They invited me to, I remember I was like, maybe I was 12, 13, 14, they'd invite me to dances.
They're like as part of their missions approach, or
I think just like a family thing they'd have at the local ward,
Okay.
So my friends and I would go, Hey, they gave us a fudgesicle after it was all done.
Oh, so it's worth it, Fraternizing with the enemy.
No foul.
Well, I loved how you said you have good conversations with Mormons often because, what did they say? Because you look like one?
because they think I look like one.
You think you look like one. What does that even mean? But it's funny.
I know. I look at the mirror and I go, they're right, but I don't know why.
Exactly. You mentioned some interesting points about the direction that you're seeing some of the younger Mormons turning in terms of their theology, particularly with their exchange with students that you've taught at Biola and things like that. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's clear to me, being kind of a historian of Mormonism, I mean, if I was just a scholar of like modern Mormonism, this wouldn't occur to me. But looking at Mormonism through the ages, over the last 150 years or so,
Right.
things have changed rather dramatically. I mean, you look at the teachings of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and some of the early prophets and apostles. It's a big difference between what's going on in terms of teaching content at Brigham Young University today. Brigham Young is a Mormon college in Provo, Utah.
Yeah, right.
Probably 35,000 students.
Yeah.
It's huge. But what they're getting would be quite a bit different than what Mormon students would be getting 100 years ago.
Right. And
so something's changed. In fact, my main lecture on this topic is called the Changing World of Mormonism. Because that's what I see more than anything else is the change. And some of it is very good.
Like what?
Well, for instance, here's a weird cascade of events.
Okay.
So there was a Mormon president, and by a Mormon president is the prophet, seer, and revelator of the Mormon church. He's in the Mormon mind, is a legit prophet.
Okay.
Really the only legit prophet on the earth.
Okay.
And so I don't know, maybe 50 years ago now, one of the Mormon prophets said, we need to read the Book of Mormon more.
Okay.
Now, I wasn't around at the time, but I imagine some evangelical Christians at the time were going, oh, that couldn't be good, right? It turned out to be very good.
Okay.
Because the Book of Mormon is generally not the problem.
Okay.
It actually has better doctrinal points in it, and more salient and historic and solid than do other Mormon writings.
Okay.
And if you read the right portion of the Book of Mormon, you can get the idea that there's one God in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That is not something you would expect Mormons to be teaching on, but there it is taught in the Book of Mormon. They had clever ways to just ignore that in the past. Also in the Book of Mormon, it talks about salvation through grace alone and by the blood of Christ alone. And that we don't usually think of that as a Mormon teaching.
Right.
But it's taught in the Book of Mormon. Now, so Mormons have picked up on these ideas because they're in the Book of Mormon and they've been told to read the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
But because the Book of Mormon has so much in common with the New Testament, the traditional Protestant New Testament, it has opened the door for Mormons to trust the New Testament more, and so they read it more. And the more they read the New Testament, the more trouble they start to have with some of the really traditional Mormon teachings, which, there's a universe filled with gods and things. That's not a Christian teaching, either through the Old Testament or the New Testament. So but it has helped open the door for Mormons, young and old, to dig into these important doctrines in a very biblical way.
Yeah, and then see how their other writings measure up to these ones. It's interesting that you don't come across Mormon apologists very often.
Yeah.
Why would that be?
Yeah. Now, in fact, I'm sure I've had contact with pretty much all of them that exist. You know? And you're right, there aren't that many.
Okay.
And they just don't do that. They in fact, even when there are some really successful and thoughtful Mormons who can do Mormon apologetics, I'm not saying they get the answers right, but they at least make attempts. They're poo-pooed and shunned even a little bit by others in the church who think that's really not where the action is. The action is in serving the church and teaching what the elders offer us to teach.
Yeah. You made I loved how you said, when you're entering into dialogue with someone who is a part of one of these alternative religions, apparent religions, and, to be wary of not just jumping to the conclusion of you are brainwashed or you're stupid or something like that. Yeah. You made a great point about how often there's very significant social reasons that they would have reason to stay. Could you speak a bit more to that?
Yeah. If you're a young Mormon man in a typical Mormon home in Idaho, let's say. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of pressure on you to conform to what the Mormon church is expecting of you, to go to the right schools, to make sure you're prepped to go on a mission, to come home and get married in the temple, and the whole thing. Lots of pressure. And if you go off the rails even a little bit, I mean, you might lose contact with your family. You might lose your employment, or at least your pipeline to employment. So
right.
There's a lot at stake, and that's true for a whole range of new religious movements. Maybe even Scientology and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, and actually, this reminds me. You provided a really great, succinct list of items that you can identify generally in cults, if we're going to go with that term. And one of them was that, there was certainly an element of control. I remember you were talked about there's often a dictatorship in terms of authority and how things are run. Could you share some more of those things that make up part of the anatomy of a cult?
Yeah, it's hard for a new religious movement to really gain traction, So that's actually in itself a very interesting sociological question.
Yeah.
How does something like the Mormon Church, or how does something like the Jehovah's Witnesses really grow to the point where they've got millions of followers worldwide?
Right, right.
There's millions of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
I don't think they're growing very fast, but they're slow and steady.
Yeah, slow and steady.
The work has been done, but in order to make that work, I mean, you can't have the Jehovah's Witness movement go forward if you think that Scripture is divinely inspired and authoritative.
That can put a wrench in things.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, the Mormons are a good example of that. One of the articles of faith in the Mormon Church is the Bible is the Word of God insofar as it is correctly translated.
Okay. So
and
there's
of course,
caveat.
That plays out in that anything that doesn't really agree with the Mormon leadership is not correctly translated.
Right. Got it.
But if it was like, no, this is authoritative no matter what, then you got trouble getting Mormonism started and off the ground. Here's another example. When I was in grad school, I knew a couple of sociologists of religion. They studied, religion through sociological eyes. And one interesting question that they were always working on was how did Christianity really gain traction in its earliest years? How to do it? How they do it?
Yeah.
Because they're comparing it to Islam. Well, we know how Islam did it. Islam, it was very clear. Muhammad would raise an army.
Yeah.
They'd march it into one of the Mediterranean region countries. They'd take it over and subjugate it in the name of Islam.
That's a very persuasive method. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a no-brainer. But how did Christianity gain traction? Being that it was a religion of verbal persuasion and so on, and just raw personal courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a little harder to figure out how that happened, but it actually turns out to be a kind of proof for the resurrection of Jesus.
Right,
because
I was just going to say.
There's only a few things that can cause people to go out and almost give themselves up as martyrs early on in the movement like that.
Right.
But if Jesus really came back from the dead, and these folks knew people who saw him, or maybe they saw him themselves, that could be the impetus or the courage maker to go out and spread this new religion, this new gospel throughout the Mediterranean region, no matter what, even if people were threatening them, by taking their lives.
Yeah, it just might be that it's actually true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
That's certainly if a guy came back from the dead, that'd impress me.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be talking
wow,
about it.
Maybe I should be giving my life to this.
Yeah.
And it appears that's what happened in the earliest church.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Craig, what are you doing now? How can people learn more about what you're doing? I know that you've got a book that came out recently. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're up to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been at Biola University running their Apologetics graduate program for 28 years. So that's basically what I've been doing.
Yeah.
I recently left Biola to help out at a wonderful organization called Stand to Reason.
Stand to Reason,
In fact, out there, you want to write this down, str.org. Oh my gosh, there's so many wonderful learning resources at that address. So keep that handy. And I mean, you can get a whole education in Christian apologetics and good Christian thinking. It's all right there for the taking. So yeah, I've been at Biola for years, and now I'm with Stand to Reason. We're just trying to make a nuisance of ourselves for Jesus in all kinds of new and interesting ways.
That's great. And what was the last book that you released?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Fearless Prayer. And it's done really well, and it's caused a bit of a stink because people haven't thought in these terms. It's really based on just one Bible verse.
Okay.
I take on one Bible verse.
Okay.
And I wrote a small book because I wanted people to read it.
Yeah.
And it turned out well, but it goes after this verse in John 15:7. Jesus says, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for anything and it will be done for you."
Okay.
And it seems to me that that's a very exciting verse.
Right, for sure.
Wow, Jesus really said that?
Yeah.
So if I'm abiding in him and his words are abiding in me, and let's just say they are,
Yeah.
then I can ask for anything and it will be done for me. That sounds like something the name it and claim it guys would be pushing.
Right.
You know,
right.
the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel folks.
Yeah.
It turns out it is one of their favorite verses.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's no doubt about that. But I don't want to let them rob me of that verse if Jesus really meant it for average people like me.
Yeah.
It turns out after I did my study, I wrote the little book, and the conclusion is Jesus not only said it, but he really meant it.
Okay.
And the exciting part is figuring out how that all works out.
Okay.
And I actually practice what I preach, and sometimes I go back and read my own book, which is really a weird thing.
I bet that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to learn something
This guy
great.
ain't half
I'm
bad.
going to go read my own book the next couple of days, and then I'm going to ask for an autograph.
You'd be so lucky.
Yeah.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for being at this event. I was blessed by your message. I know that you had some wonderful questions, the ones that you could hear.
And I can hear, oh God.
And just thank you so much for everything that you do.
My pleasure.
And go to str.org to see more of what Craig's up to.
You're good at this interview thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.